Shabbat shalom, everyone. So good to see you. Now that we're in the dog days of summer, you should know that every July I break out a couple of my favorite records by one of my favorite bands, and for a solid 3 weeks, it is officially summertime at the Hodson house because we're listening to the Beach Boys. I have many, many fond memories of listening to a lot of these songs with my dad growing up. And when I lived in Los Angeles, I'd drive around the city with my windows open, and it was great. I'd be listening to Surfin' USA or Help Me Rhonda or Little Deuce Coupe, a great, great way to listen to the Beach Boys driving around Santa Monica. And not much has changed now. I still love all those songs, and now I play them for my kids. They really like to listen to Good Vibrations, Sloop John B., all of the classic hits written by arguably one of the greatest musical minds of our generation, Brian Wilson, lead singer of the Beach Boys, who passed away just this last year. May his memory be for a blessing. So the other day, we were listening to hit after hit of the Beach Boys, and I'll tell you, it really does feel like summer when those songs are playing. But we got to a song that felt very different than the others. It was much slower. It almost sounded like a hymn. And it really stopped us dead in our tracks. This is a song called In My Room. And I'd like to read you some of the lyrics. I will not try to sing in Brian's falsetto, don't worry. He says, "There's a world where I can go and tell my secrets to, in my room. In this world I lock out all my worries and my fears in my room. Do my dreaming and my scheming, lie awake and pray. Do my sighing and my crying, laugh at yesterday. Now it's dark and I'm alone, but I won't be afraid, in my room." Now, obviously, I've heard this song before, but for whatever reason, when I listened to it the other day, it hit me in a way that I hadn't expected. So I did a little research on this song. I found out that when it came out in 1963, In My Room peaked at number 23 on the U.S. Billboard Hot 100, and it was eventually inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 1999. And recently it was ranked as number 212 on Rolling Stone's list of the greatest 500 songs of all time. Yesher koyach to Brian Wilson. Perhaps the reason this song is so powerful is because I know a little bit about the life of Brian Wilson, and if there's anyone who needed a place where he could escape and seek reprieve, it was him. Brian and his brothers Carl and Dennis grew up in Hawthorne, California. It's a suburb of LA. And while their childhood home was filled with music, their father, Murray Wilson, was horribly abusive to them. In fact, Brian was almost completely deaf in his right ear because his father would oftentimes box his ear, literally slapping him really hard with an open hand, rendering him unable to hear from that side of his head. Family accounts mention that his father oftentimes yelled at the boys after becoming their self-proclaimed manager once their cousin Mike Love and friend Al Jardine joined the band. Eventually, they voted to fire Murray as their manager, and years later, Murray sold their entire song catalog out from underneath them without ever even asking their permission first. This led to an absolute mental breakdown, where Brian was unable to tour with the Beach Boys, he was unable to interact with anyone, and certainly unable to record or produce music. Unfortunately for Brian, this abuse would not stop here. After being diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic and taking a litany of drugs in the 1960s, he would be assigned a conservator by the name of Dr. Eugene Landy, who took control of his assets and finances and made sure Brian was too medicated to prevent him from being controlled. And so, in this very vulnerable state, Brian stated that this song reminded him of his childhood bedroom, a place where he could find solace, have some sense of stability, and get away from the outside world. The song, therefore, represented his safe space. He's quoted as saying, quote, "I had a room and I thought of it as my own kingdom. And I wrote that song very definitely that you're not afraid when you're in your room." It's absolutely true. In this week's double Parsha, Matot-Masei, we get another idea about a safe space, something that the Torah calls a, quote, city of refuge. The Torah tells us that throughout the land of Israel, 6 cities were to be set aside as Azrei Miklat, cities of refuge, and these were places where someone who had caused the accidental death of another person could flee for protection, not because they were innocent of responsibility, but because according to the Torah, they still possessed infinite human dignity. In a world where grief could quickly become vengeance, the cities of refuge in antiquity stood as a barrier against violence. These places slowed everything down. It gave people room to breathe, and it gave justice the chance to replace revenge. It was in many ways God's way of saying that every human being deserves a place where they are safe enough to begin again. That idea feels remarkably close to Brian Wilson's song, "In My Room," because I think every one of us has a room. Now, I'm not talking about 4 literal walls and a roof. I hope you have that as well. I'm talking about a place of safety for our own. Maybe, as I mentioned, this is not a literal room, but perhaps it's a favorite chair or a walk through our neighborhood, perhaps maybe a seat in this beautiful chapel, maybe a conversation with a trusted friend. We all have a place where just for a little while the noise of the world can't get to us, and we can truly be alone with ourselves and have some shalom, some peace. The tragedy, however, is sometimes we get so comfortable in our safe space that we might not ever want to come back out of it. Brian Wilson knew something about that. Following years of abuse, unimaginable pressure from fame, and a deep mental illness, he spent almost 3 years in bed. Ironically, the room that had once been his refuge slowly became his prison. And perhaps that's the danger of every safe space. It can protect us for a moment, but it cannot become our whole world. Because we were not created merely to survive. We are created to live, to connect, to build relationships, to love, and to be loved. And that is why I find it so moving that thankfully Brian Wilson's story did not end in that bedroom. As difficult as his life remained, he was eventually drawn back into the world by the people who loved him the most. His family, his friends, his bandmates, those who reminded him that there was still music to write, still beauty to create, still life waiting outside of his bedroom door. And maybe that is the deeper lesson of both the song "In My Room" and this idea of the Torah's cities of refuge. Yes, safety is important. God wants us to be protected. God wants us to have places where our fears can quiet down and our souls can rest. But ultimately, bricks and walls can't save us. Bedrooms cannot redeem us. Even the biblical cities of refuge could only provide a temporary shelter. Friends, the only place where human beings are ever truly safe, I believe, is in loving relationships. The Torah infamously says, "Ve'ahavta le'recha kamocha," love your neighbor as yourself. Not simply because it's the right thing to do, but because love, I believe, is what transforms a shelter into a home. Love is what transforms a stranger or strangers into a community. Love is what transforms frightened people into people that have hope. A moment ago, I mentioned that every one of us has a room, a place where we retreat when life becomes overwhelming. But perhaps our calling as Jews is something even greater. to build a place where no one has to hide forever, to create a community where every person is safe, where every soul is protected, where every person knows they belong. Because when we love our neighbors as ourselves, we become one another's cities of refuge, and there is no safer place than that. So this Shabbat, I implore you to help one another. Take the time to ask, to listen, and to care for your neighbor, because God only knows what they're going through. Shabbat Shalom.